Hello everyone, you are listening to the Quick History Lesson Podcast. I'd like to take this time to say thank you and welcome you all to our very first episode. As you know, we are doing this on YouTube, but are also available on other platforms. We hope you press that like and subscribe button and continue to tune in as we go through this new quest of doing what we love, which is talking history. Now, I'd like to use this first segment of our very first episode to talk about Quick History Lesson, or QHL as we call it, its origins, as well as a background of myself. My name is Delton Wells, the creator of Quick History Lesson. My love for history started when I was young. I was born and raised in the Low Country of South Carolina. The Low Country is full of history. There are two moments of my childhood that I can distinctly remember that sparked my interest in history early. The first time was in 2000. I was in the Cub Scouts, and we got to visit Fort Sumter and spend the night on the USS Yorktown. The following year, my family took a trip to Washington, D.C., and we visited the National Mall. Over 20 years later, I'll always cherish those memories. Even in school, I enjoyed history class. My 8th grade teacher, Miss Sally, and my high school teacher, Mrs. Connor, were big influences for me. They made learning history fun, and their passion is something that resonates with me to this day. Going to college and learning how to improve my learning and researching skills only confirmed my passion as a history buff. In the summer of 2015, there was an awful tragedy that took place at Mother Emanuel AME. With it came the debate about the Confederate flag, which South Carolina still had flying on its state house at the time. The Confederacy and the Confederate flag obviously have rich history and is very popular in South Carolina, so it was not a surprise that some were not thrilled when the flag was finally taken down in the aftermath of that tragedy. Quick History Lesson started out as a hashtag to briefly discuss the history of the Confederate flag, its origins, and how it became as symbolic as it is. Over time, these history lessons expanded to all things U.S. history related. By the fall of 2016, I began traveling throughout various parts of the country visiting historical sites to include museums, libraries, grave sites, homes, and landmarks. In 2019, I decided to turn those hashtags into an actual history page on Facebook, and has since branched out to other platforms, gaining thousands of followers. Outside of social media, I've had the fortune of connecting and encountering all types of people and organizations. When I lived in Tennessee, I was a part of 2 organizations that helped me expand my skills and have a different type of impact in local communities. These organizations are the Mount Olive Cemetery Historical Preservation Society and the Tennessee African American Historical Group. These groups brought me in and gave me an opportunity to gain experience and grow while honing my researching and communication skills. We do community outreach and weekly cemetery restoration. We'd host cemetery tours, occasionally give speeches, and conduct interviews with locals and officials. We also place a statue and some historical markers throughout the community. Thanks to the support, guidance, leadership, and mentorship of these organizations, this podcast is possible. We'd like to conclude this segment by dedicating our very first episode to them, because without them, QHL wouldn't be where it is today. With that being said, we're going to take a quick break before we move on to the next segment. This is the Quick History Lesson Podcast. Welcome back to the Quick History Lesson Podcast. As always, we hope you press that like and subscribe button to continue supporting our channel and other platforms. Now, imagine you're in your home, on the couch in the living room taking a nap, when suddenly a loud thud wakes you up. Confused, you look to see what that noise was and you see a meteorite. Then you realize you were hit by it. Some of you may hear that and think that is crazy. However, that was the reality of Miss Ann Hodges in the 1950s. On November 30th, 1954, Ann Hodges was in her home in Sylacauga, Alabama napping when a 9-pound meteor crashed through the roof of her home, bounced off a radio, then struck her. Having just awoke, Hodges and her mother were confused about what happened. The house was dusty, so they believed something may have happened to the chimney or the heater. When they discovered the rock and the bruises on her body, they alerted the authorities. Once law enforcement and emergency vehicles arrived, word of the incident began to spread, causing a frenzy. Her husband wouldn't learn about what happened until he returned home from work. Because of all the attention, Hodges was overwhelmed and eventually went to the hospital. Before the incident, people throughout Alabama reported seeing a Roman candle-like light or a fireball coming down. Because it was during the height of McCarthyism, as well as the cessation of flying saucers, local authorities handed the meteorite over to the United States Air Force. An investigation determined that it was indeed a meteorite that happened to split into pieces, with one of those fragments coincidentally landing in Hodges' home and striking her. Once it was determined to not be an act of nuclear war, the focus shifted to disputes over what to do with the rock. Throughout it all, Ann Hodges still felt overwhelmed with the attention she was receiving. She did, along with public opinion, try to get the rock returned to her and her husband. The problem was, her landlord also wanted the rock, claiming it was hers since it crashed on her property. The Hodges were able to settle out of court with their landlord, paying $500 for the meteor. While her anxiety still loomed, the Hodges hoped to capitalize off of keeping the meteor. Tons of offers came the Hodges' way to buy the rock, who turned them all down. However, by the time they got the rock back, the hype died down significantly. Because of this, Ann Hodges donated her piece of the meteorite to the Alabama Museum of Natural History in 1956. Ann Hodges was never fully able to recover from the public attention she received. She suffered from nervous breakdowns and declining health after the meteor incident. Ann and her husband divorced in 1964, and she died in 1972, age 52. With that concludes this segment with the Quick History Lesson podcast. We will be back momentarily. Welcome to the final segment of the very first episode of the Quick History Lesson podcast. This has been such an incredible experience, and I am excited to see how far this can potentially go. With that being said, let's briefly talk about some of the topics we hope to discuss in future episodes. As I mentioned, we will focus mainly on U.S. history, ranging from a variety of things. We will try to stay away from current politics unless there's something significant. We will, however, use history to highlight how far we've come and how much more we have to do. Throughout our show, we will share content we typically post on TikTok. We'll also upload them onto our YouTube channel. Quick History Lesson is available on multiple platforms, with most success coming from TikTok and Facebook. I want to once again thank you all for tuning in. Hope you tune in to our next episode when we talk about the Montgomery bus boycott. This is the Quick History Lesson podcast. Until next time.